We will turn it over to Josh to get us started. Okay, Josh, we are ready to go.
All right, thank you, Kelsey. Good afternoon and welcome to our first Black Alumni Summit. My name is Josh Hawkins and I'm the Assistant Vice President for Alumni Relations. As Kelsey mentioned, we're very excited to have this inaugural event and we are extremely happy that each of you have joined us today. To kick off things for today, we do have a very special message from our very own president, Dr. Neely Bendapudi. So I'm going to let Kelsey show that video right now.
Alumni Summit. Thank you. Thank you for staying connected. To all of our alumni who are participating in our homecoming Black Alumni Summit, thank you. Thank you for staying connected to one another and to your alma mater. This summit is meant to be a celebration of your success and an expression of our pride in you as our graduates. We need you. I need you. We need your voice, we need your energy, we need your commitment. Because providing opportunities for all Cardinals, irrespective of their race or socioeconomic status, requires all of us to act together as one Cardinal family. And UofL is committed to standing with you and with all of our Black students, faculty, and staff. The University of Louisville prides itself on celebrating diversity and fostering equity so that we may achieve inclusion. We follow the cardinal principles, which promote our commitment to each other and to our community. Together, we will drive the needed change to strengthen all of us personally, professionally, and collectively for years to come. If you haven't done so already, I hope you will visit our Cardinal Anti-Racism Agenda website to learn more about our commitment to diversity and inclusion and to what we are doing to become the nation's premier anti-racist metropolitan research university. Let me end simply by saying we are so very proud of each and every one of you and how grateful we are that you are alumni of our university. Go Cards!
Thanks, Kelsey. As President Bendapudi said, today's Black Alumni Summit will celebrate and empower Black alumni, individuals, and groups through civic engagement, advocacy, philanthropy, and social activities. This initiative is designed to celebrate the professional and personal achievements of our diverse and accomplished Black alumni community. Now, more than ever, we need that connection. We aim to not only honor the accomplishments of our alumni, but also inspire today's participants. This afternoon's session is the kickoff to an exciting lineup of events scheduled throughout the day that brings together graduates from across generations, colleges, and careers to reconnect with each other and the university. You'll see in the chat that Kelsey is adding in that link so you can check out those events. I'd also like to thank Commonwealth Credit Union for sponsoring our first virtual Black Alumni Summit during this homecoming week. We appreciate their commitment to UofL and making this important event possible. Now let's get started with today's event. Let me first introduce today's moderator, Luke Whitehead. He's no stranger to the UofL family. He is a diversity and inclusion professional at Brown-Forman, motivational speaker, author, and entrepreneur. He is well known in the Kentuckiana area for being a former UofL men's basketball player, He graduated from the University of Louisville with a degree in communication in 2004. Luke is also the founder and CEO of Mixed Nation, a multicultural brand and movement with more than 500,000 supporters worldwide. Please join me in welcoming Luke. Luke, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for being here with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. Really appreciate it. And hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to join you all for UofL's first Black Alumni Summit. And I'd also like to say happy homecoming. Before we get started, I'd like to take some time to acknowledge and thank my friend, 2020 alumni fellow Jessica Loving, as well as Kelsey Gilda and Nakia Strickland from the Alumni Relations Department for their hard work behind the scenes to help make this important discussion come to life. And so without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce two incredible men that have lived extraordinary lives. They have broken barriers on and off the court and have achieved success in sports, academics, business, and most importantly, life. Their inspiring stories should be told, celebrated, and appreciated. I am fortunate to call one of them my father and the other a close family friend. So please give a virtual round of applause for Wade Houston and Eddie Whitehead. Thank you both for joining us today. Now let's get things started. I'd like to first pass the ball to you, Wade. And can you please share a little bit about your upbringing and your journey prior to UofL?
Sure, and thanks, Luke, for the introduction and for this event. And I'd like to start by saying that it was not an easy journey, but it was an exciting journey to come to UofL. I grew up in Alcoa, Tennessee, and was the first in my family to go to college. And my goal, after I became a pretty decent basketball player and a pretty decent student, I should say, was to go to one of the HBCUs. And that was primarily looking at schools like Tennessee State, Knoxville College, even Kentucky State, and hoping to get a scholarship to those particular colleges. But Coach Hickman, our coach at UofL, happened to have a friend that he went to school with at Western Kentucky, who was living in Alcoa, Tennessee at the time, running the post office. And he saw us play several times during my senior year. And he continually called and talked to Coach Dromo and Coach Hickman and said, you know, you should come send somebody down to see these guys play, because we were averaging like 98 points a game. We had 4 guys that ended up going to Division I basketball, and we were a special team. So eventually Coach Dromo came down to watch me play and watched our team in the regional tournament. And I happened to have a great game in front of several other college coaches from HBCUs. And that starts my story. So then I began to receive offers from other schools, and I began to buckle down with my classes, getting my test scores in order. And it was, and when I say it was a challenge, because I grew up in the segregated South in the 1950s and 60s, when I went to elementary school and high school, segregation was the law of the land, with open housing, with restaurants, hotels. So we had a world that was separate from a lot of different things that were going on in the country. So I'm just really happy that I was able to fight through that and to have a chance to come to UofL, and the story continues from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wade. Let's pass the ball to your teammate, Eddie. Can you share a little bit about your upbringing and your journey prior to UofL, please? And you may be muted. Please unmute if you are.
Okay, I'll start
There
over.
we go.
Thank you, Luke, and thanks to everybody who was responsible for putting this summit together. I think it's a great idea, and I think it's a long time coming, and I'm glad to see it now. Wade and I keep accomplishing first by being first panelists on your first ever podcast, if I could call it that, to commemorate this important event. But before I get started about myself, I wanted to give a shout out to a third party to our attending UofL, and I want to mention Sam Smith. He's from Hazard, Kentucky. He came there along with Wade and myself, and between the three of us, we set the road for what's happening today within the UofL basketball program. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned Sam before I move any further. My story is not undifferent from many other stories of kids who were part of families that migrated from the South. My mom and pop were born in Clarksdale, Mississippi. They were sharecroppers. The two of them, plus four of my sisters and brothers, picked cotton on a regular daily basis to provide support for the family and provide a way for us to sustain ourselves. In 1947, 48, my parents decided they wanted to migrate to the North to make a better family, to make a better life for our family, and to have better opportunities than in the Jim Crow South. I was very young at that age. I remember nothing about Mississippi and the cotton fields, but that legacy lives with us even to this day, because I look at them and I always admire everything that they did to accomplish what they did. They brought 8 children from the South. I have no idea how they managed that. I could barely travel with the 3 kids that I had myself when they were younger. So that was a pretty miraculous thing. And I felt like throughout my childhood and throughout growing up, that I owed them every effort that I could make to be successful. I grew up in an all-Black community just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. It was called Lincoln Heights. It was one of the first Black fully incorporated cities in the US. There were 10,000 Black people who lived in that community. There were a sprinkling of some interracial relationships, but there were 4 and in between. So my education was in an all-Black elementary school, all-Black high school. And I think one of the pluses about that is not only were all the students Black, but the teachers were as well. And we realized that a lot of those teachers who had achieved a lot of success academically were barred from teaching in the larger white community. So we got the benefit of having teachers who were well qualified, a lot of whom had master's degrees, and a lot of whom played in athletics at HBCU colleges and universities. So we got the benefit of all of that learning just because of the discrimination. They taught us well. They prepared us to be able to move out of the community and achieve success elsewhere. And they knew how important it was for us to be properly educated to do so. My father was a preacher. My mother was a cook. They taught us to love and respect others and to do our very best at school and work. I was the 7th child in that family of 8. My family went on to adopt one other. She's the youngest of us all, my sister. So there were 9 of us growing up. I had a lot of examples to follow, to watch, to learn from. My 2 older brothers were very instrumental in my upbringing. My brother just ahead of me was an all-state, considered to be a legend to this day in high school basketball. He was reluctant to go to college. He was recruited by a number of small universities because that was what was available to us at that time. He didn't feel that he was equipped academically to meet the challenge. And I was I took notes about that. I remember that very vividly, and it kind of shaped my decision-making going forward. My oldest brother was a career Air Force man, and I really liked the way that he carried himself. He was very disciplined. He had a very good posture. And I just remember he just carried himself as a very confident and strong person. Later in life, I would realize that some of those things I just mentioned about the 2 of them came to play when I made decisions going forward. Thank you. Going to making a decision to go to UofL was very simple. I wanted to go to a college where I didn't feel like I was commuting, which meant the University of Cincinnati. I wanted to be in the same conference as University of Cincinnati, but I didn't want to be too far from home. I was kind of a mama's boy at that time. So Louisville and being in the same conference, being 2-hour drive from home was perfect for me. And that's how I ended up there.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing. Let's keep it rolling. We'll flow right into it. We'll pass the ball back to you, Wade. Can you share a little bit about once you came to U of L, breaking the color barrier and some of the challenges that you were able to overcome?
Yeah, I always want to remember the guys that went before me. Although Eddie and Sam and I were the first in basketball, I think U of L was so far advanced in inclusion and equity before we got here, but not, of course, in basketball, but guys like Lenny Lyles and Howard Turley and Lee Callan and Lawrence Broughton. I mean, the list goes on and on. And Lenny was here like in the 50s. And we stood on the shoulders of those guys. And I can remember when we got to campus, the football players who had been here before us refused to go to some of the restaurants on campus. The Cardinal Inn was a restaurant on campus. And at night when we get hungry, we'd say, we're gonna go to the Cardinal Inn and get a hamburger. They said, well, maybe bring me one back, because I'm not going there, because when I came on campus here, we couldn't go to the Cardinal Inn. So I think it was incumbent on me to try to respect what the guys had done before us. As I said, guys like Lenny especially, and Lenny was one who was always a mentor. Ernie Green was another guy. And in my later life, as I got into business and became an entrepreneur, Ernie was my role model. He had done work for General Motors, brokering coal, and he was an entrepreneur back during that time. So we had some guys that we had a chance to look up to once we got here. We didn't have much. I mean, we walked to Central High School to see high school basketball games. We walked to the West End until Eddie somewhere came up with an old 1954 Chevrolet. And it's so, I remember it so well because the passenger seat on the front side, when you accelerated, the passenger seat would go back to the back in the back of the car. But that car saved us because before that, we walked everywhere we went. Like I said, the Central, to get a haircut, to the West End. So all of that was really what happened with us when we first got here. But I can remember getting here, and then I think it was 1963, Eddie and I and Charlie Johnson, who was here too, drove to Frankfurt to hear Dr. King give his speech on open housing. And we, as big athletic guys, we just kind of pushed our way down to the second row and listening to him give a speech. And it was by far the most moving thing I had ever heard. I mean, I had participated back in the early 60s in lunch counter sit-ins and those kind of things and marches, because that's what you did when you were 18, 19 years old in the South. You did those things. But to be there on that second row and to hear him speak what was the crowning moment for me, for my civil rights activities of civil rights life. So coming to U of L was an eye-opening experience. My family drove me to campus. I didn't know where I was going. It took us 15 hours to drive from Knoxville to Louisville. They dropped me off. And the next thing I know, I'm seeing Eddie and Sam and Charlie. So I'm able to have a comfort level with where I was at the university. But it was a special time. And I still don't know that the university gets enough credit for doing things back in the 50s, late 50s and the early 60s when we came. I don't think the university and people understand how the university was so far ahead of other universities in the South.
Awesome. Thank you, Wade. Really some meaningful stuff you're sharing, and I know many of us haven't heard these stories, so thank you very much. And to pass it back to you, Eddie, can you share a little bit about once your journey brought you to U of L and breaking the color barrier and some of those challenges you were able to overcome?
Yeah, I'd be happy to echo Wade. The groundwork had been set by vis-a-vis the football program and the early recruits that of people of color. So it really helped us. I couldn't imagine traveling and attending University of Louisville at that time without the support of others. It just makes me a little nervous when I read about guys during our era who were recruited and attended to play basketball at the Southern University by themselves. I think the university had some foresight in that regard because they built in automatic support for us, even without the early attendees. Wade, Sam, and myself showed up on campus together. So right away, we had some support within our small group. So we weren't out there by ourselves and alone. And then when you throw in people like Charlie Johnson, who happened to be my first roommate at the university, it just made life bearable. We didn't know what we were going to face off the campus, but we do know that on campus, in our dormitories, we had a brotherhood. And I think it's so important that you chose that title, for your summit, Basketball and Brotherhood, because that's exactly what we needed, and that's exactly what we helped to establish going for other kids coming in after us. I remember very clearly when I decided to go to Louisville, I heard on the radio, news at that time wasn't nearly what we have today. Today, you get instant news, you get information in a heartbeat. For us, it was local papers that wrote about things, maybe a radio station would communicate things. And after I made the decision to go to UofL, I heard about this other kid, this little skinny kid out of Alcoa, Tennessee, Beanpole. And I said, that guy's gonna need some company. He's gonna need some help. And then when I heard about Sam, we showed up on campus. My parents drove me down from Cincinnati. They pulled into a parking lot where Coach Dromo had set for meeting. And as my father and mother are pulling in, I'm in the backseat with my little suitcase and Foot Locker, whatever. We saw Coach Dromo standing in next to a wall, and next to him was this big 6'2", 310-pound guy wearing bibbed overalls. And my parents got nervous. They said, honey, are you going to be okay? Because they couldn't figure out what was going on, nor could I. So I got out, Coach Dromo introduced himself. He said, Eddie, I want you to meet your new roommate. And they just were, oh my goodness, they looked between the two of them, they looked at me, and Charlie broke out in a big laugh. And with that, their hearts, my mother especially, she loves him, she loved her, she loved meeting Charlie Johnson. But to this day, that made the difference for me. We knew that we were going to be in good hands. We had a coach that cared. I had a roommate that had some standing on campus. He was a great football player for UofL. He went on to play professional football, but we just had a tight-knit group. And that tight-knit group allowed us to flourish and to accomplish what we did throughout our campus life.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate you sharing that with us. And you touched on it a little bit. I know Wade touched on it, but I wanted to know what your thoughts were, and we'll pass it back over to Wade. What are your thoughts on the civil rights movement and how that compared to today's fight for social justice and equality? I think that's really an interesting dynamic that many of us haven't really thought about or heard about. So how would you relate what's going on now? And a lot of it's going on, taking place right in our, university's headquarters, home place of Louisville, Kentucky, really honoring Breonna Taylor and fighting for justice for her and for many others. What are your thoughts with how this relates to the civil rights movement?
I see a lot of similarities between what was happening when we grew up in the 50s and 60s to what's happening now. I think the young people today are stepping up. They're making their voices heard. I mean, they're tired of the systemic racism that we have come to know over the last few years. And the same thing happened back in the earlier days of the civil rights movement. People sacrificed. They weren't afraid to put their lives on the line, whether it be marching or whether it be doing whatever needed to be done to make sure people understood that there were injustices in the country. So I personally think that there are comparisons between what the young people, and not just the young people, but the older people, and you're seeing so many people of color. So it's not restricted to just to Blacks that are showing their displeasure, but people of all different races and religions are stepping up. And I think that was going on back during the days of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement back in the 60s. And we grew up during that time. And we grew up when the 3 civil rights workers were killed down in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Goodman, Swerner, and Swartz were killed. So we understood what happened during that time, but I'm also seeing a lot of good things that are happening today with the people that are showing their displeasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's pass it over to Eddie. What are your thoughts on what you're seeing today and how it relates to what you experienced back in the day?
As with Wade, I see a lot of similarities. Going back to the 50s, because things don't happen in well-defined decades, they kind of overlap. And in the 50s, I remember very distinctly the national tragedy of Emmett Till and that horrific murder and lynching. And that really affected, during my time, my age group, that really affected the national conscience of what's going on and what needed to be done in this country. We didn't have the immediacy of the moment that you do now. The immediacy of the moment means that you witness the assassination or lynching of a person of color on the streets in real time. We didn't have that then, but the impact was just as prominent in both the 50s, the 60s, and now. I remember the 60s as being a decade of national mourning. We lost a president through assassination. We lost a major civil rights leader in Dr. Martin Luther King in the 60s. We lost Robert Kennedy during the 60s. Following that, we had the horrific tragedy on campus at Kent State University with those 4 students who were mowed down by the National Guard. We had war that created a lot of unrest during the 60s. We had so many things coming at us, and then we started having, when we had people of color blended with others who were supporting the civil rights movements. Wade mentioned the 3 young men who were killed, but you also had housewives and mothers who joined the fight and lost their lives. You had Viola Liuzzo, who went on a freedom march, and she lost her life in support of civil rights. Now I look at the marches and I see the protests, and I'm really enlightened to see that so many people have picked up the mantle and joined in the fight in a very significant way. And they're putting their lives online. They're putting their reputations online. And I think that's just a wonderful way that this country is fighting civil unrest and police brutality, systemic racism of all kinds. And I really appreciate, Luke, the work that you're doing in trying to help people learn techniques to navigate through these difficult times.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Really appreciate it. And I'd like to throw in there too that recently the UofL men's basketball team did a peaceful march and a peaceful protest to really take a stand for equality and social justice. The players spoke, Coach Mack spoke. I was really proud to be a UofL alumni and to be a former men's basketball player for the university, and to be able to take my 13-year-old son with me to join them and to peacefully protest with people of all colors from all walks of life. There was even a few UK fans sprinkled in the crowd, believe it or not. So that's just diversity as well. But to see the fans of all colors and our program step up and our president for the university, that does make me proud. And I'm glad we have events like this one we're having today as well. I'd like to ask you to share, we'll pass it back over to Wade. Can you tell us a little bit about life after UofL and how your UofL experience helped prepare you for success and what some of those successes were?
Yeah, sure. I was able to, I think, leverage a lot of my networking that happened when I was here. And you have to remember, Luke, that when we came out of UofL, our number, or at least my #1 goal wasn't to go to the NBA. In 1966, my last year, my goal was to identify corporate America and to identify who in corporate America might give me a chance to be a part of that. And that was my whole emphasis at that time. Now, if anything happened beyond that, I mean, you could play AAU basketball. I mean, I went to Europe to play and had a great time doing that. But my goal was to get my degree and to decide which company I could convince that I would be an asset to that company. So times were different then. And I think that's one of the challenges today is that a lot of young men come to college thinking that they're going to go to the NBA and their plans are directed in that direction. And if it doesn't happen, they don't always have that safety net to fall back on if that doesn't happen. So, but with us coming through, we were looking for that next opportunity in the corporate world. So, so with me, I got into teaching and coaching, sort of by accident. I just enjoy working with young people, and everybody kept saying, well, you should be getting into coaching, and I did that. But I knew once I got into coaching was such a fleeting experience. I mean, you could be coaching today, some alumni, some booster doesn't like what you said, some guy in the press doesn't like what you're doing, and the next thing you know, you're gone. You know, you're out fired for doing the best job you could do. So I said, I'm not going to let that happen to me. I got 3 kids, so I aligned myself with some people at Ford Motor Company who were big UofL fans, and they told me what the needs were, needs in terms of supplier diversity. You know, we want our customer base to look like our supplier base. And then I became involved with Ford Motor Company and some other companies after I saw what the real world was like after graduating. So, but being with networking with guys, even like Eddie and Charlie and I, that Eddie mentioned, and I got into business together. But the number one thing that I reminded myself of was that I'm not here just to think I'm going to be an NBA player. I want to make sure I can provide for my family once I leave.
Awesome. Thank you, Wade. Let's pass it back to you, Eddie. Can you share a little bit about life after U of L and how that U of L experience helped prepare you for success and what some of that success was as well?
Be happy to. I have to kind of back up to get to that because I had a very cathartic experience at U of L. Unlike Wade, who may have made a decision that he wasn't going to try to be a pro, I came in thinking that, okay, I've seen Oscar Robertson play. I think I could do some of that. I'm going to try to play pro. And that was kind of part of what my early undoing as a student at U of L. Because of the nature of of the history of the basketball program and our role there, I felt that we weren't getting a fair shot to fully display our talent and to fully use our talent. We play hard, we worked hard, and I just felt like the deck was stacked against me. So, you know, in my weakest moment, I made a decision that I was going to quit the team. I didn't like the way things were going. I felt that there was racism on full display. And so I met the coach outside of Freedom Hall on one practice day. And he said, what are you doing out here? Why aren't you in the locker room getting ready for practice? I said, Coach, I'm quitting the team. And he was shocked. He looked at me and said, come on, stop kidding, get in there and put on your stuff. I said, no, Coach, I've had it. I'm done with this. So I quit the team. I walked away. And not only did I quit the team, I quit going to class. I had a very decent average up to that point, and I just stopped going to class. I shut down completely. It caused a lot of pain for my family, and then ultimately I realized how significant and negative that decision was. So I had to kind of pick myself up, dust myself off, go back to that same coach that I felt had been doing us wrong, and ask him to be reinstated, asked him to come back on the team. And he said, Eddie, you made your decision. You're going to have to live with it. And you're going to have to get yourself back into school because by that time I had my grades had dropped. I was in a terrible predicament. So I had to really go back. I had to go to each professor that I had at the time and convince them that what I did was totally uninformed, totally wrong. And I found 1 or 2 professors who were willing to work with me to get me back. Coming back, I came back a different person. Basketball was still important to me, but I realized that may not have been the way to go for my future. From that point, I joined the Air Force ROTC. They had just started a 2-year program there at the U of L. I joined that. I became a cadet student. I was still on the basketball team. I was still in school. Long story short, I got on the same day that I graduated, I got a commission into the Air Force, second lieutenant. 1 month after graduation, I was ordered to go to New Jersey. I served 2 years at the Air Force Base here in New Jersey. And then I went overseas for 2 years, and I spent 2 years in the islands of the Azores. That was my 4-year duty. What I didn't know at the time was that, number one, I was the only African-American in that 2-year Air Force ROTC program. So there you are, another first. And I wasn't aware of that, but I became very influential in that cadet corps. I led the drill team for the entire ROTC. I remember very vividly in one of the parades in Louisville, I had the troops and I was marching them down the main street in Louisville with the parade, and I had them go through all of these maneuvers. And so I really grabbed that and I just said, okay, now there is something that I can do to be meaningful and that would matter. I didn't know at the time that the Air Force put a lot of money and a lot of emphasis on athletics. And when it was determined and when it was discovered that I played for the University of Louisville, I got involved with local based basketball, and that morphed into several levels of selection for all-star teams. And ultimately, I was selected to represent the armed services, the 4 branches with the team that went nationally and internationally to compete. There was a military version of the Olympics that we engaged in for the 4 years that I was in, and we won that every single year. And these are all countries all over the world that typically were playing their Olympic teams. After the Air Force, I decided to go back to school because I wanted to prove to myself and to others that I could handle academics without the support of basketball. I went to Berkeley. I got 2 master's degrees. I got admitted to the doctoral program in epidemiology. And after I finished all that, I realized that I didn't want to do that. I got involved in real estate, developed a very nice real estate career. And from real estate, I went into broadcasting. I owned 5 stations over time. I retired from that in 2002. And now I'm doing whatever I can do to make life better for myself, for my kids, and for the community and the race of which I'm a part.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think I'm gonna have to get my act together. I got a lot more work to do to follow in your footsteps. But thank you so much for sharing that. And I wanted to, at this point, make sure we're being inclusive of the audience. And I know we had some really good pre-submitted questions, and we've been getting some questions coming through on the chat. So now at this point, and you and Wade will get a chance to share some more words and answer some of these questions. But I wanted to pass it over to Kelsey so she could ask you all a couple of those questions as well. But this is excellent. I know we could have had this go on for hours because you two have so many amazing stories and it's so inspiring. So we really appreciate you. But Kelsey, over to you.
Thanks, Luke. Yes, we did receive quite a few pre-submitted questions from the audience, and we really appreciate that. We are going to do our best to answer as many of those questions as we can within our allotted time here. If you have any additional questions that you would like to ask Wade or Eddie, you can drop them in the chat, and Nakia is going to help us monitor that. So Wade or Eddie, whoever wants to take this one, this question came in from Toby in the chat, and he would like to know, in an unequal and unfair world, did playing basketball give you a sense of fair and equal treatment? If it did, is there anything as a society that we can build off of or learn from that experience?
I could take that in part. I think athletics, because of how it's embraced by society, it always gives you a little bit of an edge. Now, when you take off your uniform, and we experienced that at UofL as well, when you take off your uniform and you're not identified as an athlete, you're taking the same amount of abuse, the same amount of prejudice, the same amount of heartache as anyone else. But when you put on that uniform, people seem to accept you for entertaining them, but they may not accept you as the person that you are.
Yeah, and I think to add on to what Eddie has just said, I think athletics gives you a platform, whether it gives you a platform as a player or as a coach or as an owner. And then once you have a platform, you're able to reach a lot of people that you couldn't normally reach just by doing things in everyday walks of life. So the biggest thing I've seen in athletics, whether it's LeBron James giving opinions about Black Lives Matter, whether it's owners deciding that they want to do certain things to affect what's happening in their own communities, athletics gives you platforms and it gives you an access to people that you don't, in some cases, ordinarily have access to. So I'm all in. I'm all in for athletics. I'm all in for these guys and young ladies having a platform. So I am really hoping that we continue to give them a platform as we have in the past.
And sort of piggybacking off of that question, can you maybe give some advice to white allies and what white allies can do in order to help advance the cause?
That's a very good question. And that question, I've heard it before, is raised a lot, and I think it needs to be. White allies are very important to eventually, and I don't know that we'll see it in our lifetime, but very essential to progressing forward so that racism isn't the predominant factor that it is today. But what allies need to realize, in the normal course of life, they may never experience what African Americans experience on a regular, routine, daily basis. And they need to ask questions. They need to not just be an ally, but they need to be active in fighting racism. And that's difficult because they have to sacrifice and give up some of themselves to do that. They may have to suffer some ridicule at work. They may be ostracized in their own families, but allies are very important to the struggle and to the fight and to try to reach racial parity. But I think by showing a willingness to work and a willingness to connect, I think is the starting point. And I appreciate that kind of question.
I think so much of it is economics. I think white allies have to decide how you can economically impact people of color and make a difference. I mean, how do you figure out how redlining affected the lives and the economics of Black and people of color? So now how do you include them? How do you put Blacks in positions of leadership versus positions of just having a job? So wealth moves on from one family to another family once you put people of color in a position to gain wealth. So it's whether you're having someone now who moved up from a labor position to a manager. We have to figure out how to put people of color in positions of strength where it can affect their economic lives. So I think we just want to make sure that we have inclusion, we have equity, and don't discriminate simply because of someone's the color of their skin.
Yeah, great responses. I'd love to jump in too and put on my D&I hat, if you don't mind. Just some practical tips for our white allies. And as was mentioned earlier, we've been seeing people of all colors step up for this fight for social justice and equality. I've peacefully protested numerous times, and every time I go, my heart feels full because I'm seeing just really a rainbow of people from all walks of life coming out to really try to step up now. And so I would say just some practical steps for white allies is you need to listen. Even being able to listen to some of these experiences and some of these stories and things that are happening makes it more real. You need to get educated. And so you could get on Google now. There's really no excuses. You can get on Google, you can get on Netflix and look at Black content and the history of discrimination and oppression within our country. So really educate, there's no excuse not to be educated at this point and to learn. Get involved, speak up, intervene, welcome discomfort. You know, it's not always going to be easy. Sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable, but you need to welcome that discomfort. And then no one's perfect, so at times we'll make mistakes, but learn from your mistakes. And then lastly, I'd say stay engaged. And then Wade also mentioned financially, you know, supporting efforts that are going on to make life more equitable for people of color in this country is extremely important as well. So just wanted to share some of those practical tips.
And I would say, as a finish point, for people of color to accept the efforts of our white allies, and don't turn them off just because they don't have the same skin that you do. And I think that's very important. So there has to be acceptance and understanding going both ways.
That is great advice. Thank you, Eddie, for that, and Luke and Wade. So this question we actually got multiple times, so I want to go ahead and put it out on the table. It applies to both Eddie and Wade, who had children who followed in their footsteps and had careers in college athletics. And the audience would like to know, how did your experience of playing, you know, basketball in the 1960s compare to that of your sons who followed in your footsteps? And did you provide them with any advice, you know, as a young Black man at a predominantly white school?
Well,
I guess I'll jump in first, Eddie.
okay, go.
For me, it was a great family experience having my son play for me at the University of Tennessee. I know it was easy for us, but he made the decision, and he said, if I have a chance to go and stay with my family for 4 years, because my dad's been away recruiting for UofL for 15 years, he said, my dad has brought so many NBA players, so many All-Americans to UofL, and the family has been totally engaged in making UofL such a successful part of college athletics over the 70s and 80s. He said, now it's time for me to go with my family and see what we can do as a family to be a good athletic family. So he made the decision. But when he came on campus for the first day, I said, look, you have to get your degree in 4 years. And he was a math major for 3 years. And because he couldn't get the math classes he needed to graduate in 4, he switched over to liberal arts. But the main thing I told him, I said, no matter what happens to you athletically, the NBA, because I can't go into a living room of a family and say, I want you to come to University of Tennessee and graduate if you don't graduate. So what I told him was that, you know, your character counts, your ethics, everything counts, but I want you to get your degree in 4 years, and that's what he did. But it was an easy decision for us, and for just to have your family there together meant a lot, and it was a happy time, happy 4 years for us.
As for my situation, I think Wade and I can both really relish in the fact that we saw our kids develop their own track, their own way. I was fortunate because not only Luke, but my daughter Maya and my oldest son Pax were fortunate to qualify for Division I scholarships, full rides. And I told each one of them, I said, you know, you have an incredible opportunity at your feet. The number one thing you need to do, and you owe it to yourself, you owe it to the people who are invested in you, to get your degree. You might have your dreams set on the pros, you may be able to play further, but chances are you probably won't. And not through no fault of your own, the numbers just do not work for kids to reasonably expect that they're going to go to the next level. It was unexpected, but I was really happy when Luke decided to accept the UofL scholarship offer. And he said he wanted to wear my uniform, the same number. And I just felt very proud about that. Pax, my oldest son, played for Vanderbilt, and he wore number 24. So I was really happy about that. The one thing I really didn't like about any of that was Luke did a side-by-side photo that he published, and he had me in my UofL uniform with the buckled, tidy Daisy Duke shorts. And he had on his nice, a model could have worn this, these nice shorts that hung down long. And so he has that as a side-by-side. And I don't know if he did it on purpose or it was a comedic act, but I just took that to heart. And the changes weren't just the way kids wore their uniforms or the way uniforms started to be designed. I think they were really, I think there was a lot more pressure added onto them just because they were the son of Wade, who was a coach, or the son of Eddie, who was a former player. They had to develop their own way. And as much as I'd like to, sometimes I wanted to get involved in some of the things that I saw happening with them at their various universities. But I said, Eddie, you got to sit back. You didn't have that. Your parents never picked up a phone and called anybody. You had to fight every battle that you had on your own. And I realized that was a very character building and a very strengthening situation. So I let each one of them make their own decisions about how they played, where they played, and the heartache that they may have gotten, just playing on a team. So, but I'm so grateful that I was in a position to help them chart a path that rendered them successful in some degree.
And we have time for just maybe one more question. And I think let's end on what could be a happy or a funny note here. Can each of you share what your favorite UofL basketball memory is?
Interesting. Wade, you can go first. You signed first.
Personally, the best game I had of my college career would be my number one memory, and I have to give two. My second, well, let me talk just briefly about that. Well, that was a game against LaSalle, my last regular season game when I played here. I had just a great game with Eddie was on that team, Wes Unseld, who was the man on that team, and Dave Gilbert. But anyway, I think I scored like 36 points. I was 13 for 16 from the field, 10 rebounds, and Eddie and Dave just kept feeding me the ball. And the more they fed me the ball, the more I scored. So that was my best memory. My second memory would be winning the '80 championship in Indianapolis against UCLA when I was an assistant coach.
For me, it's kind of muddled. When you're playing that level of basketball and you play at the time that we played, for me, a lot of it just was muddled. And when I was thinking about the most memorable basketball moment, it's very difficult to pick out. But my probably the most cherished moment that I had was not the actual game, but when you recognize what I told you before about the heartache and the quitting and the recovery and coming back, when I was named one of the captains for the varsity team during my last year of eligibility, that to me was kind of a crowning achievement because I'd gone through what I did. I worked hard. I had to really go after getting back and get reinstated. And to have that reward kind of really put nice icing on that cake. And I really appreciated that moment. It did a lot for my psyche to know that I did what I did and recovered, and not only recovered, but to achieve even more. So it wasn't a basketball moment, but it was achievement in athletics. And I remember that very well.
Thank you both so much for sharing. Luke, we will turn it over to you for a couple of final closing remarks.
Awesome. Well, this has been, greatly appreciated. I'll say we really appreciate all the work that was put in behind the scenes to make this happen. So thankful we're having a Black Alumni Summit here at U of L, and hopefully we'll do this for years to come. I think it's really important and valuable. On behalf of all of Black alumni from U of L, I'd like to just say thank you so much to both Wade and Eddie for really paving the way, not only for future Black athletes at U of L, but for students at the university as well. And we want to give you your flowers while you can smell them. We cherish you, we appreciate you, and just thank you for all that you've done. And I think we'll close it out like that. One more virtual round of applause if everyone doesn't mind. And thank you, thank you, thank you. Go Cards.
And before everyone jumps off here, we just want to say thank you so much to Eddie and Wade for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, and your story. Thank you to Luke for serving as our amazing moderator today. And so before we officially close out, I want to invite everyone to 2 events occurring later in the day. The first is the new Cultural and Equity Center launch, and the second is the Cardinal Reunion. Please click on the links in the chat for more information on both of those events and to register. Additionally, we are already looking forward to planning future Black Alumni Summits and would love your feedback. So after our 2020 summit concludes, we will be sending a survey out to all registrants. We ask that you take a few minutes to let us know how we did, what you enjoyed, what type of programming you'd like to see in the future. Your feedback is very, very valuable to us, and we would love to hear all about your thoughts and how you feel about all the programming for today. So looking forward to seeing some of you later today, and thank you for attending.
Thanks, Nakia. All right, everyone, thank you so much.